Isang mapagpalayang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Ako po ang inyong Ate Maine at ito ang The Maine Agenda, kung saan ang isyu ng bayan ang ating main priority. Pero bago po muna tayo magsimula ng ating programa, ay tignan po natin ang COVID-19 cases ngayong araw. Ngayon nga po ay September 21, 2021, kung saan nga po ang 49th anniversary ng martial law, kung saan dapat po nating tandaan na never again, never forget. Ito po ang active cases ng COVID-19 ngayong araw. As of today, we have 171,142 active cases. At ang total na po, it brings a total of 2,401,916 total COVID cases sa bansa at total deaths po ng 37,074 at total number of recoveries na 2,193,700. Again, pumalo na po tayo sa 2,401,916 na total cases ng COVID-19. Ayan po ang COVID-19 cases sa ating bansa ngayon po, September 21, 2021. So wag pa rin po nating kalimutan to observe yung ating mga health protocols at kung may pagkakataon po tayo, magpabakuna na po tayo. Ayun. Alright, no? So nais ko lang pong ipaalam sa lahat that the Maine Agenda is produced by Quarantalk Media, and ngayon po, we are now streaming sa FB pages po ng Now You Know at IKOT.PH. So ngayon nga po, September 21, 2021 marks the 49th anniversary of martial law. Ito po ay a very dark period in the Philippine history wherein thousands were killed, tortured, and disappeared. It is a time where human rights, civil liberties were abused and trampled upon by the Marcos dictatorship. A time wherein expressing dissent against the government will get you nga po, tortured, disappeared, and killed. And 49 years later, hindi pa rin po nakakamit ang hustisya ng 70,000 na ikinulong, 34,000 na tinorture at 3,240 na pinatay noong panahon ng martial law. At sa panahon pong ito, sa rehimeng Duterte, kung saan lagana po ang human rights violation, fake news, historical revisionism, at mga Marcos apologists, tila baga po, pilit na namang pumuposisyon ang mga Marcos na bumalik sa kapangyarihan. At masasabi na rin nga ba natin na may pagkakapareho o paralelismo ang martial law na naranasan noong panahon ni Marcos sa administrasyong Duterte? Para po pag-usapan yan, makakasama natin ngayong gabi ang isang human rights activist, specifically po in the field of Indigenous people's rights, a survivor of the Marcos dictatorship, having been illegally arrested, tortured, and detained for 2 years during the martial law period. Sa kasalukuyan po, siya ay nakaupo bilang Advisory Council ng Cordillera People's Alliance at siya rin po ay Chairperson ng SELDA Northern Luzon at SANDUGO Alliance of Moro and Indigenous Peoples for Self-Determination. Ngayong gabi po, makakasama natin si Ma'am Joanna kay Cariño. Hi, Ma'am!
Hello, Germaine. Good evening.
Good evening po, Ma'am. And thank you once again po sa pagsama sa atin ngayong September 21 na makabuluhan pong araw na kailangan natin hindi makalimutan talaga at pag-usapan po, Sa ating pong mga manonood, you may send in your comments and question po dito sa ating comment section. Ma'am Joanna, before we start the program po, maaari niyo po bang ipakilala ang inyong sarili and a little bit about the organization that you represent?
So, I am Joanna Cariño. I am an Ibaloy woman, Ibaloy Igorot woman, here in Baguio City, Cordillera region, and I am already a senior citizen, as you can see. I stopped dyeing my hair with the pandemic, and I have been a human rights activist practically my whole life.
Opo. Ayun. All right. So, it is actually a message, Ma'am Joanna. Sabi ko nga po, it is definitely an honor to interview her, someone who has been fighting for human rights and for the rights of the Filipino people for a very long time. And it's very nice po na nakasama natin si Ma'am Joanna ngayon para marinig natin yung kanilang naging karanasan noong martial law para hindi na ito maulit at patuloy natin ipaglaban ng ating mga karapatan. So Ma'am Joanna, simulan natin yung kwentuhan.
Yeah.
Opo, excited na ako marinig yung inyo pong mga ikukwento sa amin ngayong araw. Simulan ko po, when martial law was declared, I'd like to ask, nasaan po kayo noon? At ano po yung pinagkakaabalahan nyo at that time nung dineklara ito?
Nung idineklara ang martial law, I was a student activist here
Opo.
in Baguio. So I was a student at the University of the Philippines, Baguio. And in the years before martial law, kasi there was an economic and political crisis in the years right before martial law. So dumadami ang nagproprotesta, lumalabas sa
Opo.
kalye. And it is in the nature of youthful idealism. Siyempre, I was still so young then. You know, it's in the nature of youthful idealism to seek answers and
Right.
solutions to work for a better society, especially as Philippine society then was beset with problems. And therefore, at that time, right before martial law, the Filipino youth came out in their thousands, tens of thousands, demanding system change. I was among them
Those
then
students po.
as a young student at UP Baguio.
Opo.
Pero also, to bring it to a wider context, there are 8 of us siblings in the family. And at that time, previous to martial law, 5 of us, the 5 eldest in the family, were already activists. Even
Opo.
before martial law. Yes.
Opo. So talaga pong you can say talaga na even yung nga, the declaration of martial law ay prior to that, madami na po talaga mga hindi kaaya-ayang nagaganap. Kaya ang dami ng mga estudyante po talaga ang lumabas para mag-alsa, no, and express their dissent sa rehimeng Marcos at that time. Ma'am Joanna, that time, nung the martial law was declared, what was your first and initial reaction?
You know, 1 year before martial law was declared, the writ of habeas corpus was suspended. He had suspended the writ of habeas corpus in August of 1971. And during the suspension of the writ of the habeas corpus, there were already activists who were, some were disappeared, but some were already imprisoned. And my younger sister, Georgie, she had just graduated from Philippine Science High School then. She was among 4 activists here in Baguio who suddenly did not arrive home that night. And so we were looking for them all over, only to learn in the following days that they were already in Camp Crame. She was only 16 years old at that time. So actually, the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus was already, kumbaga, a preparation for the later suspension of martial law. And therefore, actually, sa mga aktivista noon, parang sinasabi na nga martial law is coming, martial law is coming. Kasi if you will remember, the Plaza Miranda bombing, na pinagsasabi, ginawa daw ng komunista, tapos na-ambush si Enrile, na sinasabi uli, ginawa na. So, the political crisis was coming to a head. The opposition, the political opposition to Marcos, really were going to replace him. Tapos binomba nga yung Plaza Miranda. But it was also so clear that he wanted to stay in power. But he could not do that legally. He could only do that if he would declare martial law. No? So, which he did. So, when martial law was suspended, ni-raid nila yung mga opisina, yung mga headquarters ng mga aktivista, yung mga bahay, yung mga eskwelahan, ganyan. Pinaghahanap nila yung mga aktivista. And there were mass arrests, actually. Pero shortly before martial law, some military men, I think, called up our father, my dad, telling him, ilamang man dagita anak mo, or that's in Ilocano, you'd better hide your children because martial law is coming, because nga there were so many of us activists in the family, and actually our house then was like a headquarters for activists in Baguio. No? People were there, were sleeping there, were meeting there, and therefore we had to look for places to hide, or no, to keep ourselves safe, so that we would not be included in the mass arrests. No? And therefore, in the initial dragnet of mass arrests, and here in Baguio, ang dami-dami talaga, punong-puno yung Camp Allen at saka yung Camp Dangwa. there was no place to put them, and therefore they had to put parachutes because they were out in the open air.
Mm-mm.
So there were mass arrests, pero kaming mga magkakapatid, hindi kami nasama in the first round
Mm-mm.
of mass arrests because and not only us, also some, you had to be prepared, you had to have a place where you could sidestep or leave the place and try to do some work
Right.
elsewhere, etc. But of
Opo.
course, marami talaga ang naaresto. And then, in fact, some of the activists here in Baguio, naaresto sila, then for a few months, and then na-release sila. And then mamaya, gumagawa na naman ng manifesto, dinidistribute na naman sa Baguio Cathedral, di ma-aresto uli. You know, there are some activists here who are arrested twice or three times, even 4 times, no? Ganyan yung nangyari noon.
po noon.
Pero
Opo.
we knew that martial law was coming. No, I mean, we knew that martial law was coming. It was really, I mean, you could see the signs. We knew it was coming. We knew there would be mass arrest. We just did not know how bad it would be. But we knew that activists had to prepare to adjust to a difficult situation, had to be ready to sacrifice, and had to prepare for hard struggle.
Opo. Ma'am, ang talagang napakatingkad po dun sa sinabi niyo na despite the fact that you knew that martial law was coming, hindi kayo natakot. Kahit kayo in a safe place, tuloy-tuloy yung trabaho. At nabanggit niyo nga po na ilang mga aktivista, 2-3 beses na naaresto, pero hindi sila natatakot. Ano po kaya yung nagpapaalab doon sa puso niyo at sa inyong kagustuhan na ipatuloy yung paglaban?
Kasi actually, at that time, previous to martial law, there were activist headquarters, and we would be having education on the ills of Philippine society. But not only that type of education, activists were actually developing a value system. What were the slogans? Paglingkuran ang sambayanan. Serve the people. So parang ito yung nade-develop, no, na value system. So there is a value system that was being developed among the activists through the process of your pagpapanday, kumbaga. You go to the picket lines, you see the state of the workers. We went to the barricades of the market vendors because they were being going to be demolished, etc. And then you may have come from comfortable homes, but there was this program of basic masses integration where you went and lived with the underprivileged and the marginalized to learn that situation. And naikintal actually yung paglingkuran ang sambayanan. Serve the people.
Serve the people. Opo. Napakaganda po na sinabi niyo, ma'am, na talagang tagos sa puso po. At sana yung mga manonood, no, kumintal din sa kanila yung sinabi niyo po na patuloy natin paglingkuran yung bayan. Ma'am, you mentioned na marami po during the basic mass integration that you did, maraming mga naghihirap. Nais ko pong idikit ito doon sa katanungan ko na, sabi po kasi nila, nung panahon ng martial law, napakaganda, panahon ng Marcos, walang naghihirap. Ano pong masasabi?
Ay, hindi yan totoo. Siyempre, hindi naman yan totoo. In fact, the figures for the data for poverty during the martial law regime was 49%. No? And then, after martial law was declared, and then we had to go underground. Kasi there is no other recourse. So that's why many went underground. Many even joined the New People's Army. Kasi otherwise nga, makukulong ka, matutorture ka, mamamatay ka, etc. And for those who, like you had to adjust your methods of work at ganun nga. So I went to the provinces. I lived with peasant families, with workers' families, and poverty was really, I mean, talagang grabe yung poverty. I do
Poverty.
not know what they say when they say that it is a golden age. Kasi hindi ko naman yan nakita, ano.
Mm-mm. Opo. Ma'am, I hate to ask you this po, no? Pero ano po yung inyo po yung naging personal na karanasan? Per our research po, and kayo po ay nakulong, no? During the martial law era. How was that experience, if you may share to us po? If you're comfortable with it po.
Actually, I talk about this because we have to share this so that the people will know the
Yes.
truth, no? So, in June of 1974, the room where my younger sister Georgie, she was the one who was detained nung suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. So we were together. And the room that we were staying in was raided midnight ng gabi. Biglang katok-katok ganyan, we were raided. Tapos ang dami nilang military, kakatakot. And so they started, slapping us, beating us around, And then, like, I had to be already preparing myself. I think, my God, they can kill us, they can rape us, etc. Ganyan. Anything can happen. And then, they took us. Kasi this was in Pangasinan, eh. And then, they took us to somewhere near, I think, Lingayen Beach, because there was, what do you call that ba? Yung kiosk, a concrete kiosk. So they were questioning us and, of course, harassing us and, slapping us. And then they took us to a safe house. And this is where it's very dangerous, because that's where they do the torture, actually, in the safe house. And the torture that we suffered was electric shock, the main form. They would put wires here in your thumbs and in your big toes. Actually, for the men, they would put it in their penis, and for some women, they would put it in their nipples. But for us, they did it in our thumbs and big toes. Then there's a crank, which they will, it's like a crank, and the more they do that, then the voltage will shoot throughout your whole body, and you're really, wreathing in pain like that, screaming, and in sweating and everything. And they would do that to my sister and have me watch. Then they would do that to me and have my sister watch. And we were in that safe house for, we don't even know how many days, 2 or 3 days. They wouldn't let us, we could hardly sleep. They would not let us sleep. And then, after that torture in the safe house, we were finally committed after 2 or 3 days to the detention center in Campo Olivas. So when you are committed to a detention center, parang dokumentado ka na, kumbaga, you're listed somewhere, ganun. Because while you're in a safe house, like, nobody knows where you are or what's being done to you or whatever. And then when we were already in Camp Olivas, we weren't put in the detention center. We were kept in a room in the intelligence office. My sister and I kept in a room in the intelligence office. And then when we went to the detention center, you're supposed to undergo a physical exam. So we went to they were brought. So we were showing the doctor, you look at the burn marks here, kasi andyan pa naman kung saan here. But they wouldn't look, they would just sign you as in good health or something like that. But shortly after that, I got sick with hepatitis something, which I really think was due to, to the wires and to the torture, But while we were in prison there in the room, in the intelligence office, torture was also being done. So it's not only in the safe houses, they were also doing this in Camp Olivas. We could see activists, they would be brought into that next room, and then we could hear the screams and the moans and the, sounds of torture. And because we were kept in the intelligence office, one day we saw a busload, more than a busload, of new political prisoners. Some of them could not walk. Some of them really had, extreme, injuries, etc., like that. And then we heard their stories of extreme torture. There's that book by Raisa Robles where she actually details and accounts the torture. And also, our story is also part of the Amnesty International report of 1975 because for some reason, Marcos allowed Amnesty International to come in because he kept on saying that there were no political prisoners. And then they were able to visit, and then they came to Camp Olivas, and so they interviewed the political prisoners there. And so we recounted our stories of torture, which they included in their report.
Opo.
So, torture, this is very inhuman. Kasi what it intends to do is to make you lose all self-confidence, make you lose your, just to dehumanize you. That is what torture does. And that was SOP, Standard Operating Procedure, during the martial law regime. And this is well documented. It's hard to believe because it's so inhuman. But it happened. 35,000 tortured during that period of martial law.
That was a lot po, no, ma'am. Thank you for sharing that to us. At sana po magbukas yung isipan, no, nung ating mga taong hindi pa rin naniniwala. Nagkaroon ng ganitong klaseng pangyayari ng torture nung panahon ng martial law. Hindi po ito imbento lang. So punta po tayo, ma'am, no, sa dami po kasi ngayon ng napakaraming mga Marcos apologists, historical revisionism, binabago nila yung nakatibo despite, no, the fact na well-documented. Sa tingin niyo po ba, bakit po nagkakaroon ng paglaganap ng ganitong klaseng pag-iisip?
Yung isa dyan, ginagamit ang pera. Pera for what? For building a troll army. In fact, did you see that news story? Was it Esquire magazine or whatever? Bongbong Marcos had commissioned this
Cambridge Analytica po, ma'am.
yeah, that Cambridge Analytica, di ba?
Yes po.
To rebrand
Yes.
the family and martial law. But that was going to be very expensive kasi ang ginagawa pala ng trolls, this was reported in Esquire magazine. History is being rewritten before our very eyes.
Yes.
Kasi yung trolls, they were even editing Wikipedia. Especially in the months leading up to the burial of Marcos sa libingan ng mga bayani, no? So he had to be a bayani, etc. And so yan, they were actually doing editing in Wikipedia. How many edits were done there? And then not only that, they would set up so many accounts where they would put all of this one-sided listing of the achievements, mga kalsada, cultural center, etc. The exchange rate, mga ganun, one-sided. Na hindi naman sinasabi yung torture, human rights violations, yung poverty, yung lumobo ang foreign debt. Dito lumobo ang foreign debt. Dito din nagsimula ang labor export policy when Filipinos became the main export, overseas contract workers. Pero hindi sinasabi na $10 billion ang ninakaw sa kaban ng bayan. No? So, ginagamit ang pera which from the ill-gotten wealth to hire a troll army and to hire, like something like Cambridge Analytics, precisely to refurbish the image, to rebrand the dictatorship, to make it acceptable. Not only that, to make it sound positive. So talagang yun yung historical revisionism. Tapos ginagamit talaga nila ang trolls at saka ang social media.
Opo.
We should not allow this to happen.
Yun nga po, I'm about to ask po, no, how do we put a stop to this?
Yung isa kasing malaking problema, hindi pa kasi nai-include sa curriculum
Yes.
at naituturo sa school ang katotohanan tungkol sa martial law.
Right.
I mean, human rights and martial law and the reality, kasi this is naman very well documented. It's not as if nga gawa-gawang kwento lang ito. This is documented, but it is not being taught in the schools. And therefore, di ba, yung mga millennials, wala naman silang kaalam-alam sa martial law. Tapos, andyan sila sa social media. Tapos, nakikita na nila all of the positive, kasi ang dami-daming accounts ng mga troll army. All of the, pag kinakalat nila na ganito yung martial law, etc., etc. And therefore, kasi andyan sila sa social media, naniniwala naman na sila. Last night, on an aside, I was also invited for an online talk show. Pero this is with young people, millennials talaga, young people. Parang Philippine Scouts, amateur. Anyway, I was really surprised kasi they're so young. And then to start with, they were asked, what do you think of martial law? My goodness, so many of them really said, maganda, kasi may disiplina, maraming kalsada, infrastructure. Saan nila yun nakuha? Talagang yan yung ikinakalat ng troll army.
Kailangan po talaga ma'am, parang ng edukasyon, isama sa curriculum natin,
Yes.
yung tunay na nangyari noong panahon ng martial law. Ang dami naman pong resources, well documented, and yet bakit to lumalaganap yung ganitong historical revisionism. At ang dami pong Marcos apologists, and yun nga po recently, nagkaroon nga po ng interview with Bongbong Marcos. Ano po masasabi natin doon, ma'am, na parang he was painted in a different light, na parang ang nang sinasabi ay okay, parang wala namang nangyaring tawag dito, atrocities nung panahon ng kanyang ama, at binigyan pa ng platform. Dapat po ba natin bigyan ng platform yung mga ganitong klaseng, kagaya po nung panahon ni Marcos, kagaya po ni Bongbong, dapat po ba natin silang bigyan pa ng platform?
Yung mahirap, the powerful, can always find the platform. Di ba? Kaya lang, precisely, if we look naman at yung naging reaction diyan sa interview na yan, precisely, it's just a one-sided presentation. And syempre, from their point of view, for a political agenda. Kasi clear naman that that's part already ng plano niyang magbalik sa Malacanang, ganyan. So, I mean, that's why it's very important to have educational activities like this. Kaya lang, hindi yan sapat talaga. It has to be institutionalized in the curriculum.
Right.
Kasi habang hindi yan itinuturo sa eskwelahan, talagang the young people, the millennials, where will they learn about martial law?
Social media lang po, no?
Exactly. Social media, naandyan nga yung troll army. So, talagang it has to be institutionalized. Ngayon, this is so funny in the Philippines, di ba? Kasi, may batas nga di ba? There was that Republic Act which recognized the victims of martial law and which even gave indemnification to the victims of Marcos martial law. Ganyan. So, kahit naman, in other words, yung batas already recognized the torture, the EJK and everything. The victims, some of the victims, not all, have been compensated, have been indemnified. Tapos, these are the realities. Tapos sasabihin nila, walang atrocities, walang kwan. Para bang they are just lying through their teeth. Yan pa yung masama kasi no apologies at all. They have never apologized to the Filipino people for these atrocities. Yes, up to now.
Up to now. Ma'am Joanna, nais ko pong malaman din, sa tingin niyo po ba may pagkakapareho or may paralelismo sa nangyari noong panahon ng martial law under Marcos at itong kasalukuyang rehimeng Duterte, given nga po yung mga blatant attacks on human rights defenders at sa dami na rin po na pinatay ng mga nasa vulnerable sector at mga patuloy na lumalaban para sa karapatan?
For martial law survivors like myself, I have a feeling of deja vu, no? Deja vu. Nakita ko na ito noon. Bakit nangyayari uli ngayon?
Opo.
Ano? Then, I was a victim of torture, illegal detention. Now, I am a victim of trumped-up charges, red tagging.
Opo.
Then, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, thousands of political prisoners, evacuation. Now, the same extrajudicial killings, bakwit, enforced disappearances. Deja vu. It's really deja vu. I seem to have seen this all before then, but it is again happening now.
Unfortunately po.
Unfortunately, yes.
It's happening again po. Ma'am, ano pong sabi nyo nga po, no? It's happening again. At isa na naman happening again ay mukhang tatakbo po at pumuposisyon na naman ang mga Marcos to gain power again. Si Sandro Marcos, yung apo ng diktador na si Ferdinand Marcos ay tatakbo sa Ilocos bilang kongresista. Si Bongbong ay nagdeklara po na tatakbo bilang Pangulo. Ano pong masasabi natin dito, kayo po bilang biktima ng martial law? At ano po yung masasabi natin at mapapayo natin sa mga manonood na ano po bang dapat natin gawin? How do we not allow them at yun nga po, ano pong dapat natin gawin para for them not to regain power again?
I am part of Karma, the campaign against the return of the Marcoses to Malacanang and martial law. And therefore, we really have to campaign against the return of the Marcoses to Malacanang and martial law. No? It's clear that yun nga, he has already announced that he would run for the presidency. And then si Duterte naman is announcing that he will run for the vice presidency. I mean, we have to say no to Marcos and Duterte in 2022. People say one should not transfer the sins of the father unto the son. Diba? Yan yung sinasabi nila actually. Kaya lang, mahirap yun, that it was only Marcos. It was nga a conjugal dictatorship. It was not only a conjugal dictatorship. It was a family dictatorship. Si Aimee Marcos then was head of Kabataang Barangay. Yung isang Trajano na estudyante sa Lyceum who was critical of her in a forum there was suddenly found killed in the streets. Si Bongbong was sent to study in London. His father bought him a house there, another for his guards, using ill-gotten wealth that was stolen from the Filipino people. When he came back to the Philippines, he was made head of the PhilComSat, and he was commissioned into the armed forces of the Philippines. In fact, you even see him look at the pictures, you even see him in fatigue or camouflage military uniforms. So, they were also part of the whole dictatorship. No? And therefore, they cannot wash their hands of the sins of the father because they were also part of that whole dictatorship. And yun nga they have never apologized. They have never acknowledged all of these crimes against the Filipino people. Ang sama-sama niyan. And therefore, we really have to educate. We really have to continue educating the people and manawagan tayo talaga na no to Marcos Duterte in 2022. And baka importante din na manawagan tayo sa kabataan. Kasi actually, isang major venue ngayon is really social media. So, they have a troll army na bayaran. Tayong mga aktivista, lalo na kayong mga kabataang aktivista na marunong naman dyan sa social media, we also have to build our own troll army para sabayan at mag-tit for tat talaga dyan sa lahat na sinungaling at fake news na ikinakalat sa social media.
Tawagin po natin, Ma'am Joanna, na Truth Army naman tayo, di ba?
Oo,
Oo,
Truth
yes,
Army
Truth
naman, yeah.
Army.
Truth Army versus the Troll
Troll
Army.
Army,
Yeah,
yes. Opo.
we have
Kailangan
to
natin
build
ng
that. We have to build
opo.
that.
Education based on facts and evidence-based po talaga dapat, no? Which is ang dami nga ulit, no, na sources naman na available natin, no? Kailangan lang talaga na hamigin natin yung mga iba pa na hindi naniniwala dito at medyo may doubt pa. Kailangan natin silang i-educate. Magbasa lang po muna tayo, Ma'am Joanna, ng ilan pong comments mula po sa ating mga manonood. Simulan po natin kay Junjun JDT. Sabi niya, never ever again, talaga may ever, never ever again to martial law. Mula naman po sa CHD, CBHP, no to historical revisionism. Marcos, no hero, never again. May isa rin po tayong comment mula nga po sa Karma. Basahin po muna natin yung isang comment po from Karma. Ang sabi nga po ay hashtag no Duterte Marcos 2022. At meron po tayong katanungan po, Ma'am Joanna, no? Mula po kay Nika Rivera. Ang tanong po ni Nika ay, how do we fight the disinformation? Papaano po itatawid yung katotohanan sa mga taong hindi nire-recognize yung mga nangyaring atrocities noong martial law? Kasi madalas na nga pong nakakapagod na mag-engage sa kanila dahil sarado na yung isipan. Despite po the continuous education, paano kaya natin sila yun nga maitatawid at maihahamig doon sa katotohanan? Thank you, Nika, for the question.
Yeah, it's really quite difficult. But I think education is really the key. But it cannot only be informal education through, venues like these fora. It has to be institutionalized in the official curriculum. And therefore, we really have to campaign to the Department of Education that, and I mean, history teachers, this is what UP, or the Museum of Ateneo, this is what they're trying to do. We have to develop the curriculum on human rights and martial law, and it has to be institutionalized in the educational system. So that talagang maituro sa mamamayan. And therefore, that's not easy to do. What with an educational system that is under the control of, the present dispensation na kanyang idolo, he said, is Marcos. Pero we should persist in trying to have this institutionalized in the educational system, while we also persist in using all avenues, all venues, all fora. Kaya nga kahit ang tanda-tanda ko na, I am willing to speak na nga sa iba't ibang tipo ng events and occasion. Like this past week alone, ang dami-dami ko ng activities na dinaluhan. So we also have to use all of this. But really, it has to be institutionalized in the educational system. Pero very important yung kanina. Let us all make ourselves a truth army to counter the troll army that is spreading all of this disinformation, lies, and historical revisionism.
Opo. Ma'am Joanna, may ilan pa po tayong tanong. However, sa ibang post po kasi siya lumabas. I'll read it to you na lang po. No? May tanong po si Gat Bautista. Ang tanong niya po, have you ever met a revisionist in person? And how did the conversation go?
I have spoken in some fora where, meron din magsasalitang apologist, ganyan. Kaya lang, ang sinasabi ko kasi tuwiran kong karanasan. Saksi ako. Tuwiran kong karanasan. My torture, I am a survivor. And therefore, and also, halimbawa, in the presentations, because it's very well documented. There are books, there are things. So, whenever I make a presentation, it's well documented. So, mahirap naman nilang nagsisinungaling ako. No? So, in other words, I have actually been in fora where merong Marcos apologist. Pero they cannot say, I am a liar and so I win.
Truth, no, shall prevail po talaga.
Yes, truth shall prevail.
Opo. Yun po. May ilan din po tayong comment po dito mula po kay Maureen. Mukhang nanonood po siya over our YouTube channel. Sabi niya po, share ko lang po na na-open po sa martial law ang friend ko after watching Liway, yung movie po about kay Cecile or banda po, no? Siya po yung si Commander Liway, opo. Mayroon din po tayong comment po mula naman po kay David Dayaw. Comment po and tanong, no? Sabi niya po, pagbibigay pugay sa mga lumaban kontra sa paniniil sa ilalim ng diktatoryang Marcos. Ang tanong niya po, Ma'am Joanna, maaari po ba kayong mag-share a brief, no? Kwento lang po tungkol sa mga kapatid natin IPs po noong panahon ng martial law. Yung
yes.
naranasan po nila.
Yes. Oo, meron akong kwento dyan eh. One day in Camp Olivas, biglang merong dumating na truck ng mga new detainees. Tapos yung iba sa kanila, naka-G-string lang, nakabahag. Tapos ang dami-dami sila. There was even no space for them. They were just crowded there in the, inside the fence of the detention center. So, tanong namin, bakit? What are these Igorots here for? Tapos ang sabi, they were protesting and resisting the Chico Dams.
Yes.
Kasi nung panahon ng martial law, yung isang flagship project ng diktador, magtayo ng 4 na mega dams across this Chico River through Mountain Province and Kalinga, 4, which would actually displace so many indigenous communities, mga katutubo, from their ancestral lands. Dito naman sa kabilang probinsya ng Abra, binigay naman ni Marcos yung 200,000 hectares of ancestral forest sa kanyang crony na sa Herminio de Sini for a logging and paper pulp concession. Nag-alsa ang mga katutubo. They used their traditional socio-political institution, the Peace Pact or Budong. They built unity across all of those villages that would be affected by the Chico River. Dinala si Manda Elizalde dun, the presidential assistant on national minorities. He did not succeed. Dinala nila yung ang dami-daming military to force the people to impose this development aggression upon the people. But the people used their indigenous practice of futad, which is total community mobilization of indigenous communities, men, women, and children, to resist the project. Hindi nila na itayo. World Bank funded project. This was early in the years of martial law, the darkest years of martial law. 74, 75, 76, nag-aalsa sa kabundukan ng Cordillera against the Chico Dams. Hindi nila na itayo. At kahit yung Cellufield Resources Corporation. That was indigenous people's power, stop development aggression before people power sa EDSA ay pinatalsik ang diktador.
Pinapractice na po talaga ng ating mga kapatid na katutubo, no, na makikita din po natin hindi lang yung human rights ang tinrampol upon ng rehimeng Marcos, kundi pati yung environmental natin, no, at yung cultural as well, yes. No, sa nais po nilang gawin na development aggression kasi marami nga daw po, sabi nyo nga po, ang madi-displace ng mga indigenous peoples. Magbasa lang din po ako ng ilang comments po, no, mula po kay Marcos San Gabriel. Ang sabi niya po, I think one of the reasons why revisionism works is because it creates an illusion and pride of what we allegedly were and what we could have been. Pinoy pride can sometimes speak to being toxic. Dagdag niya pa, human rights and martial law remain trivial in basic education. Narratives, analysis, and critical thinking is not necessarily integrated. We need to support teachers and implementers to institutionalize the study of martial law in the Philippines and other concepts such as human rights and the roles of the state. Ayun nga po, sinusugan niya po yung sinabi niyo po kanina, Ma'am Joanna, na kailangan talaga institutionalize natin yung ganitong yung pag-aaral tungkol sa martial law, human rights sa ating mga curriculum po. Ma'am Joanna, bago po tayo magtapos dito sa ating napakayabong na naging discussion at ang dami po natin natutunan, tiyak po yung ating mga manonood gayon din po, no? Meron po ba kayong closing message or parting words po sa ating mga manonood, lalo na po sa mga patuloy na lumalaban po sa karapatang pantao at patuloy na nilalaban na hindi na po maulit ang martial law?
Let us always remember the horrors of martial law. We should never forget. And so we remember and spread the remembering by speaking in various fora such as this. Let us persist in building the critical mass and the broadest united front against tyranny and dictatorship, which was able to oust the dictatorship then, even as we seek to replace the dictator now. And we should always hold on to the timeless slogans of that period. Makibaka, wag matakot. Be resolute, fear no sacrifice, and surmount every difficulty to win victory. Justice for all victims of human rights violations. Never again to martial law. No, Duterte Marcos in 2022.
Thank you po, Ma'am Joanna. Maraming salamat po sa pagsama niyo sa amin ngayong gabi. At ipagpapatuloy po namin ng mga bata aktivista ang paglaban niyo po upang hindi na po maulit ang martial law. Never again, never forget. Thank you again, Ma'am Joanna. Have a
Thank you
great night
also
po.
for this opportunity to share my story. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Isa po kayong inspirasyon sa aming lahat. Thank you po. Yun nga po, no, nakasama nga po natin ngayong gabi po si Ma'am Joanna Cariño ng Cordillera People's Alliance at isa nga din pong martial law survivor kung saan nga po siya itinorture at nakulong ng 2 taon. Sa maganda po nating usapan, no, na almost 1 hour po with Ma'am Joanna, nalaman po natin yung mga atrocities na naranasan niya. At hindi lamang po siya, pati rin po yung kanyang mga kapatid, yung mga kasama nila sa kilusan. At hindi po joke ito, no, hindi siya imahinasyon, yung mga naging ginawang pagpatay, pagtorture sa mga lumalaban against sa dictatorship ng Marcos. At makikita po natin na despite the fact na it is well documented, patuloy pa rin po ang paglaganap ng historical revisionism at yung patuloy na pagkakaroon ng maraming Marcos apologies. At nakita nga din po natin na pumuposisyon na naman ang mga Marcos dito sa ating gobyerno, nais na naman nila to regain power at eventually maging presidente na naman po. Ito yung ninanais ngayon ni Bongbong. So ano nga ba ang dapat nating gawin? Nabanggit po natin ito kanina with Ma'am Joanna. No? We build a truth army. Labanan natin yung kasinungalingan na ginagawa ng mga troll army. Maging aware tayo, maging mulat, ipaglaban natin ang katotohanan. Pag hindi nga po natin inalala ang nakaraan, we tend to repeat it. So, kailangan po natin na hamigin yung mga taong hindi naniniwala sa naging atrocity sa martial law. We educate them. Ipakita po natin ang maaaring mangyari kung hahayaan natin na itong rehimeng Duterte ay maging kagaya na naman ng rehimen Marcos kung saan madaming pinatay. Na ngayon nga din po ay nangyayari na maraming pinatay, tinorture at nawawala. Huwag po natin kakalimutan ang horrors nga ng martial law na sinabi po ni Ma'am Joanna. We should never forget para never na rin pong mangyari ang martial law sa ating bansa. Yun nga po, no, maraming salamat po sa ating naging usapan ngayong gabing ito at pinapasalamatan po ulit natin si Ma'am Joanna for joining us. Pero bago po tayo tuluyang magpaalam, ay gusto namin kayong anyayahan na samahan kami dito sa Quarantalk Media for the whole week para po sa aming mga programa. Okay, so every Mondays po, okay, hold on. Medyo meron na po tayong technical difficulties, no? So anyways, every Tuesday naman po, the Maine Agenda, magbabalik na po tayo every 9 p.m., no? And then we still have QT Earth with Rodney Galicia at 9 p.m. Every Thursdays naman po, 9 p.m. po, Throwback Kasaysayan with Professor Gio Giang. And every Fridays naman po ay yung ating SDG Tambayan with 2030 Youth Force. And meron pa rin po tayong mga new shows. I-check out nyo lang po ang ating social media channels dito po sa Quarantalk Media. Muli ako po ang inyong Ate Maine, and you may follow me on my social media accounts. For Facebook, it's Germaine Jalandoni de Ruña. For Instagram, and it's at Germaine Jalandoni de Ruña. And on Twitter, it's at Germaine J. de Ruña. So you may reach me po on those accounts, and feel free po to suggest kung ano pa ang nais nyo pong pag-usapan. The Maine Agenda po is produced by Quarantalk Media, and we are now streaming po sa Facebook pages ng Now You Know at IKOT.PH. So kita-kita po ulit tayo sa susunod na Tuesday kung saan po ang issue ng bayan ang ating main priority. Ito po ang The Maine Agenda.